All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Robotics Seminar Series. So first, the two customary announcements. If you're an undergrad who wants to get credit for the robotics minor, make sure that you fill out the survey on the Robo website. And number two, everybody is welcome to the robotics lunch in the F-Wing immediately following the seminar. So please join us. And with that, it's my great privilege to welcome our very own Christine Allen-Blanchette, who, as I'm sure many of you know, is an assistant professor in the mechanical and aerospace engineering departments, and also director of the CAB lab, CAB, CAB being Christine's initials, so great lab name. Christine does some very exciting work at the intersection of machine learning and geometry with applications to dynamical systems and robotics. And so if phrases like Hamiltonian GAN or SO3 equivariant representations get you excited like they do for me, then I'm sure we're in for a treat today. Before joining Princeton's faculty, Christine was a presidential postdoctoral fellow at Princeton, and they obtained their PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. And among many honors and recognitions of their work, I'll just mention an NSF Award for Integrative Graduate Education and Research Training, as well as a GEM Fellowship from the Adobe Foundation. And with that, please join me in welcoming Christine.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, it's kind of nice, right, to be like on this side and look out and see people that I know. That's actually great for me. And folks who I admire, thank you for coming. So the title of this talk is Designing and Applying Neural Networks with Structure in Mind. But really, the title of this talk is Sharing is Caring. Okay, so that's the underlying theme. Okay, so the CAB lab, this lab, we think a lot about mixing neural networks and engineering principles. And so, right, like the usual way that people talk about this, I think these days is AI for science, where maybe you have some scientific problem that you're trying to resolve and you use AI to help you along the way. So we do a little bit of that. We also do some science for AI, which I think is like a big theme in our group as well, where we use scientific principles to structure our neural network architectures so that we can make sense of them. And so we're like at the intersection of these things. I sort of like to think of us as doing like AI with science or science with AI. I don't know. Anyway. Okay, so if we think about the kinds of work that we do in our group, there are a bunch of ways to mix AI and the neural networks and the scientific principles. In this hierarchy, Rose Yu produced this hierarchy. She's got this great paper, Physics-Guided Deep Learning for Dynamical Systems. And the hierarchy is like, you're using a neural network for your physics problem or your dynamical problem, and you use a black box neural network, so that's here at the top. And then you constrain your solution by your loss function. Or if you know something a little bit about the system that you're modeling, maybe you use some of the equations that are relevant for your problem, this white box component, and then for the parts that you don't know, like maybe there's noise or something, imperfections that you aren't able to capture in your model, you use a black box model for that. So this hybrid physics deep learning models. And then there are these other classes of models, physics-guided architecture design and equivariant deep learning models, where we actually put hard constraints on the neural network models themselves that are inspired by the kind of problem that we're looking at. And so the work we do in our group is here. And as you might suspect, some of these models that are black box can be a lot easier to implement. Maybe you have used an off-the-shelf neural network model for your problem and got good results on your training data. But it turns out that oftentimes you get better generalizability when you actually constrain the architectures themselves. And so even though it's even though it's harder to do this kind of work, we get to generalize to a out of distribution data, and we get better training efficiency when we use this approach. And so that's what we do. Okay, and so, yeah, so I told you sharing is caring, right? And so the thing that I kind of want to push in this talk is that when we use AI and scientific principles together, or we use tools from across disciplines together, we can get greater insights. Okay, and so I'm going to start with this idea of shared tools across disciplines. So this is hopefully something that we all agree on. So my background is computer vision, and so I've thought a lot about convolutional neural networks. So convolutional neural networks are usually used for processing image data. So if you look at this top figure, the image all the way on the right, you learn some filters that process that input, and then apply a nonlinearity and then process that output, again, using convolution. And the convolutional process, we take a filter. So here it's illustrated in gray in our input image. We could imagine this blue figure is our input image, and we're sliding this filter across the image to produce an output. Here it's depicted in green. But convolution definitely shows up in our engineering work as well. So if you've had something like signal processing, or if you've taken a controls class, this figure is taken out of Clarence Rowley's book for the undergraduate controls class. We think about convolution here as the way that we combine the description of our system and an input to our system to get the output. Convolution, yeah, is showing up across domains. And if we sort of use or have information about how it's being used in these different domains, then we can maybe use swap the intuition across domains and build better models. So this is my first slide. That's the end of that part. But the rest of this talk is divided into parts that identify something shared across problems and thinking about how we might design and apply neural network models that share something. Okay, so we talked about the tools that we've used in both our AI work and our engineering work. And this part, I'll talk about a symmetry that we've identified in both our engineering problems and our AI problems. And before going too deep into the problems themselves, I want to say what I mean by symmetry. Okay, so yes. All right, so I'll say that a symmetry, if we have a function f and an object x and a transformation g, g can be called a symmetry of the function f if when we apply f to our input object, we get the same result as if we apply it to our transformed object, gx. Okay, so if we're use this example of a pyramidal shape, we can think about the function f as being naming this structure. And we'll be very particular and require it to look just like this, where this point is aligned here, where a point is aligned here. And we can think about symmetries of this object as being transformations g as being rotations around the z-axis. And so these transformation g are symmetries of identifying what this shape is, because if we rotate it by k pi over 6, then we get something that looks exactly the same. So we recognize it as exactly the same shape. And that extends to numerous shapes, and not just, shapes that we construct, but also shapes that we see in nature, like snowflakes. And the symmetry that I pointed out on that previous slide is a rotational symmetry. And that's exactly the symmetry that I want to focus on this part of the talk. So we see rotational symmetry across problems. In our work, we've looked at rotational symmetry as it presents in image classification. Here, also in robotics, and also in fluid dynamics. In our image classification, there's the geometric transformation, right? So if we think about, you pass a picture of a car into your neural network. If you flip that car on the vertical axis, then you still want your neural network to say it's a car. Or if you rotate it, you still want that neural network to say it's a car. So this is a geometric symmetry. But we also have a perceptual symmetry, and so that's actually what I'll talk about next. I don't want to skip over exactly these ideas of the robotic symmetries and symmetry in fluid. So in robotics, we can think about if we have our robot and he's trying to perform a task in this room, this environment. The direction that robot should go should change if the environment changes. And so we can think about that as a symmetry, structural symmetry, geometric symmetry as well. And in this problem, I'm not a fluids person, but we got together with some fluids folks, and they are interested in Rayleigh-Bernard convection. And in that problem, they have this fluid volume, and they have a heated plate on the bottom and a cooling plate on top. And the behavior that you see in the fluid, you would expect that behavior to shift predictably if you like rotate or translate the heating and cooling elements, right? So this is rotational symmetry. And okay, I told you I'm going to talk about this first thing in images. Color. Yeah, so here we end up talking about the geometry of color. And color is a super important cue for us as animals, like as we're navigating the space. Color definitely helps us differentiate things. And shape is super important too, but color is important. So if I just show you this image and ask you, what's this object that this person is holding? Okay, so maybe you use your priors about shape and you look at the background and you say, oh yeah, there are some leaves there. Maybe it's a fruit. Oh yeah, and it's got kind of, maybe you can't see it, but I can see it. It's got kind of a wrinkly surface. Maybe it's a citrus fruit, an orange or lemon, right? But maybe it's just a ball, and he's just holding it in front of this background, right? And so color is a cue that we would be able to use to maybe be more certain about what's going on in that picture. As it turns out, color is also super important for neural networks. So this is a picture, a cartoon of a convolutional neural network, inception, architecture. And when we first started looking at convolutional neural networks, so like if I reach back in time, we were super excited to see these filters in the early layers of these networks that give us a lot of information about the shape that's going on. Oh yeah, we've got Gabor filters. We're learning Gabor filters. We already know Gabor filters from our signal processing. Okay, cool. And then later in the network, they're more complicated shapes. But if we look at the filters, the rest of the filters, a lot of them give us information about color contrast, and color gradients. So these also end up being quite important in the neural network literature as well. And we can do a small experiment to sort of see the impact of color. So we look at MNIST, if we put a neural network on MNIST, we expect very high performance. And if we color our MNIST digits and we use the same color distribution in training as we do in testing, then we do get very high performance. But if our training distribution, the color here, is a different part of the colors wheel than the test data set, our performance drops quite a lot. Even though it's the same digits, we have the same shapes, the network is tuning into the color here and is using that color to make judgments, and then fails when the color distribution is different than the distribution it was trained on. And so we can gather from this that there's poor generalization to unseen colors, or hues specifically. And we can dig a little deeper into this and sort of try to understand what's happening. And maybe this doesn't tell us exactly what's happening, but it gives us a hint maybe that if we look at if we take the features from the last layer of the neural network and we use t-SNE to project them into a 2D plane, right, then we get this kind of visualization of the features that we're getting when we pass in a digit. So if I pass in my 3, right? So a 3 will give me a point here if I do the t-SNE projection. But actually, as I change the hue associated with that 3, the feature moves through the space. And if I'm doing that for like all my different digits right here, these colors don't have to do with the hues of the digits themselves. They're color coding which digit it is. So the zeros, the 9s, all of the digits actually show the same behavior, where if we test on out of distribution data, then the feature representation that we get out of the network for that digit that had a color we haven't seen before gets sort of mixed up in the center here. And so this sort of makes sense why we would have this accuracy drop. Okay, so MNIST. But color also matters in, our real world stuff. Like if we think about medical imaging, color shows up there as well. We have varied color for taking tumor cells and trying to image them. Depending on how you process them in the lab, you'll get different hues, right? And so if we apply a neural network that's sensitive to color, then we may have problems there. Also, if we're doing skin lesion detection and our training distribution trained on very specific skin tones, and then we try to deploy it in the world where there are more skin tones, then we can have problems there as well. So there are some maybe straightforward ideas, or maybe ideas that are on the tip of your tongue about how we can deal with that. And one is, okay, why don't we just get rid of the color, right? It's the problem. Let's just get rid of it. It's fine. But we saw in our first motivation slide that if you remove the color, it actually harms your ability to understand what's going on in the picture. So we thought about that. Another thing that we can do, and this is something that we do often with like geometric transformations, is we can do augmentation. So we can take our input image and then just sort of shift it in the color space. And now we have many more colors represented, and maybe we build up some invariance to color change. But, this has some expense associated with it. And also you're not getting all of the colors, right? You're getting some of them. Okay, so those are two ideas. And people have used approaches like this, right? So there are a couple of different ways folks think about building in robustness to color. They think about, well, you can change the image itself, or you can learn, for example, to penalize the result when there are changes due to color. So some kind of soft constraint here on top. Right? But folks have also looked at hard constraints. And so in this paper here, Chang et al., they use images in the color space where the pixel values are invariant to luminance changes, so they address luminance. And this other paper actually addresses hue. And then our work kind of sits here with these others where we address color, so hue, luminance, and saturation using hard constraints. And so I want to play this one video. So in this video, we start with the RGB cube, and it's showing the RGB cube being morphed into this cylinder shape. And this cylinder shape is the HSL colors, gives us the HSL color space. So if we have any color in RGB, there is a mapping from that to the HSL color space. And this HSL color space, as far as I know, was first sort of explored in graphics, trying to identify a perceptually a color space that's consistent with human perception. And if we look at even RGB, this color cube, right, it has some kind of geometry associated with it. We choose this HSL color space where we have this cylinder, in part because we have this rotational symmetry on top for the color. Okay, and so, see, all right. Okay, so now we have some sense, there's some geometry associated with color. And here I'm going to give a plug for my class on geometric deep learning. So if you're interested in trying to think about the geometry of your problem when designing your neural networks, this is basically the theme of the talk, then you may be interested in the geometric deep learning class, which is happening in the spring. So think about it, All right. So, yeah, geometric deep learning, I'll tell you what it is. They actually use these ideas about identifying the geometry of the space we're interested in and embedding those priors in the neural network itself. And so I want to go back to how can this help us? So we talked about symmetry before. And so one symmetry, if we're trying to do 3D object classification, for example, so we have our 3D object, one symmetry of this object, because we're just trying to classify it, is if I rotate that object, then the class label doesn't change. And so we can build an architecture that embeds that symmetry by using representations that have that same property. And so here we have this object. If we rotate it in 3D space, the representation shouldn't change or the classification shouldn't change. And so we build an image of this 3D object on a sphere because we know if this object rotates, the sphere also rotates in a similar way. And if we do something like pass it through all these filters that are also spherical filters, they're all going to rotate together. And when we get to the output here, the output will have just rotated a little bit. But if we do an averaging, then we get rid of that rotation and we have something that's invariant at the end. Okay. So this is kind of the idea. And we can do this for a bunch of different kinds of structure. So we're used to this one, right? Where, so this is convolution in the plane. That's this picture here where we're doing convolution here. But convolution actually gives us the shift invariance. That shift invariance is exactly that equivariance that we saw when we mapped to the sphere and we rotate it. And it gives us a predictable change in the representation. So that's exactly equivariance. You can imagine if I take this input image in blue and I shift it to the left a little bit and I process it, this output is also going to shift to the left a little bit. Okay, so we saw that. We've seen that a lot in R2. We just saw it on the sphere, but it's not just those two cases. Any structure, any space that has group structure, we can do that on. And so as it turns out, the rotation group has that group structure. And so I'm going to talk about how we apply these principles to thinking about color equivariance, learning neural networks that are equivariant to color transformations. Okay, and so I said this thing about, does it have group structure? And so the rotation group has group structure. And I'm just going to talk about the hue part because if I talk about hue, saturation, and luminance, the pictures just get wild. So if we talk about hue, we saw that cylinder, and the cylinder has this circle on top, and the circle maps onto rotations and happens to have this group structure, right? So we can call the hue group a group that's formed similarly to thinking about rotations, right? You can change the hue by rotating on this hue pinwheel. And so then if we have defined this hue group this way, we also want to talk about the hue group action and also relate it to rotations. So we have here that what we want if we pass an input image into our neural network, so we process it with our neural network F, and we get some representations. And then if we rotate that input image on the hue wheel, we've rotated it, and then we pass it into our neural network, then the representations that we learned rotated. So this one now maps to this one now maps to this one, okay? So a rotation, hue rotation on the input gives us a rotation of our features in the neural network representation. So this is that equivariance property, that shift invariance property that we saw before. And how do we implement this? Okay, so we build a convolutional neural network, but this convolutional neural network is now on the rotation group. So it's a little bit tricky, this first layer, because our input images don't actually live on the group, right? If you're going to do convolution, both have to live on the same space. But we can use a lifting layer. So take this input image, shift it on the hue space, and now it lives on the group, right? I have representations of it on the group. And I can design these filters that also live on the group. And then do convolution of that input with my filter bank and do that convolution on the group. So in my first pass, right, where I first construct this, so I'm thinking about my filters I, then I'm processing these input images with the filters in this configuration. And then if I rotate everything, if I rotate, so I change my element H in my sum, I'm rotating a different position on the this discretization, the rotation group, right? I shift my filters and then I process again and I get this different output. And I apply another rotation, I shift my filters again and I get a different output, and I shift them finally this fourth time, and now I've seen all rotations of my filter bank, and this is how we do convolutional processing on the rotation group, the discretized rotation group. Okay, so does it work? Well, if I remind you of our example with the MNIST digits, where we test on MNIST digits that are colored in one distribution, part of the hue space, and the test digits are colored from a different part of the hue space, then we get this really incredible drop in performance. But if we use our neural network that's designed to be equivariant to changes in color, we actually recover the result that we got when both the train and test set were in distribution. Okay, so that's a good sign. And we also did some introspection, looked here about the representations that we learned and how they were laid out in the space. And we saw that when we used the conventional architecture, if we trained on some colors and then tested on others, the colors we didn't test on for all the digits end up getting mixed up here. But if we look at the representations that I learned when we use our architecture that's designed to be robust to these rotations of the hue space, we see that things are like sort of more compact here. Right? And also, yes?
I may have missed one part here. The mathematical procedure that is applied at the beginning, if you get down to the raw detail, are you attaching
this here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you attaching a linear vector space to each pixel and then think about the rotation group on that linear space, or that kind of detail is not in core?
So are we talking about the filters or the images? Maybe I just give it a try and you tell me if I address your question, yeah? No, tell me.
I think it would also apply to colors.
Yes.
Color variants.
Yeah.
So I could imagine attaching to each pixel a vector space and then thinking of rotations in this vector space.
In that vector space. Okay, so yeah. So that's an interesting strategy. Actually, the other paper that I mentioned that attempts to do this, Robert Jan, they actually think about each pixel as being in a vector space, this RGB value, and then they rotate in the RGB space. But if you remember, the RGB space is a cube. Is this useful? Am I on the right? Okay, good. So the RGB space is a cube. So if you just take an arbitrary pixel in that space and rotate it, if you rotate it the wrong amount, you get outside the bounds of that cube. And so we have this other strategy for doing that resolves that limitation. Should I continue or are we good?
Please.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Just walk them out technically.
Yeah. So instead of doing that, okay, so there are a couple of different steps. We take an input image. Your input images are almost always given to you in RGB space. We put it in the HSL color space, and then we shift on the hue space. So the hue space, you can think of it as in degrees. And if you get to more than 360 degrees, then you just do modulo or whatever, and then you end up back, right? It's just like the cyclic structure. And so And the way that we shift on that space is actually by adding to the hue channel. So when we do this discretization of the hue space, or like the rotation space, to get only 4 elements, we add, what do we add? We add 90, we add 90, we add 90, we add 90, and do modulo 360. For that hue channel, we have a hue, saturation, luminance channel. And the results are these 4 images. Yeah? Yeah. My pleasure. Thank you. Okay, so I stopped here where I said, yeah, we get this more compact representation, and that sort of gives us some intuition for why we have much better performance, because now, yeah, we can basically separate all these clusters with linear classifiers, right? And the other thing is that, yes, so thank you for your question. Because we intentionally built in this structure, and this structure is interpretable, we know how to understand this structure, we can do things with these representations that we wouldn't be able to do so easily with just a neural network that didn't have an understanding of color structure. And so this image is actually a sorting of a data set by color, which we can do like just by pairwise distances of our features. Okay, so this, you know, I talked about color here. I talked about a specific symmetry that we see both in images, we see it in robotics, we see it in other engineering disciplines. And I went, you know, into detail about that. But similar techniques can be used across all of these domains. Okay. All right. So, yeah. So I'm trying to convince you that sharing is caring. And I gave an example of symmetric structure. And now I want to talk a little bit about shared dynamics across problems, and sort of like this interplay where we can use AI for science and science for AI, and these things working together for the benefit of both. So this equation here is where we'll sort of focus. And it's been used to describe decision processes, so opinion dynamics. And these are the things that determine like collective behavior. So if we think about, oh yeah, all my fish folks in the audience, we think about like schools of fish, or if we think about, you know, a bunch of people in a crowded market, or if we think about cells, right? And even this one I really like, if we think about like the joints of your hand as being different agents and they're working together to like help you pick up things reliably. Okay, yeah, all these agents working together and making decisions in the space. This linear opinion dynamics model is one that maybe we would use to try to understand how these systems are going together. But a limitation of this model is that as you move forward in time, all the agents, because it's linear, all the agents are going to come to agreement or consensus. They're all going to come to the same idea. And that's not what we see in real world systems, right? And so I just want to give a sense of why that might be for this particular expression. So here we're doing the convex combination of the opinions or whatever of our agents. And if we think about our agents as actually just being points in a space, right? If we do convex combination, we're always between those guys. And if we think about them as more complex objects like function, if we do complex combination of these functions, we're always between these guys. So we really can't do the outcomes that we can see are really constrained by the initial opinions of the agents themselves. To address this limitation, our wonderful Naomi Leonard, who's not here, and hers, together with Anastasia, developed this nonlinear opinion dynamics model. And so that, yeah, this is an opinion dynamics model that has this nonlinearity here. And so it can be described by these parameters. These blue ones are like the intrinsic parameters, intrinsic characteristics of each agent. So One is like, this D is like how resistant the agent is to changing. This U is how attentive the agent is to other agents in the space. This alpha is how much they enjoy their own opinion. So we all know people like that. And then these, orange parameters are parameters that are extrinsic to the agent. So like this one here, AA, is who I'm connected to, who I can communicate with if I have your phone number or whatever. And AO describes the opinion space itself. So like if I'm a person who likes chocolate ice cream, I probably also like chocolate cake, right? So those things would go together. Whereas me liking chocolate ice cream probably says nothing about whether I like bananas, for example, right? Okay. And BI describes something about the environment and its impact on you. And so if we want to build a little intuition about what happens here, so unfortunately these colors don't correspond to those, sorry about that. But if we consider this case A, right, in this case, so U is always positive. Consider this case A where U is very small, right? This saturation function is a tan H function. So it's very small, very close to 0. If you input something that's very close to 0 to tan H, you get something like 0, right? And all you're left with is a linear function. So now we're back to the linear opinion dynamics model and everything converges. And so like if we think about all of these as different agents, they have different opinions. If we're in a setting where we selected our attention to be very close to 0 over time, they're all going to converge to the same value. Okay, whereas if instead we pick an attention that's way out here, so past this critical point for the bifurcation, so that's B, and we start with agents that all have these different opinions, over time they'll maintain different opinions. So that's the intervention brought about by that model. And this model has been successfully applied to a bunch of stuff in engineering, right? Like in information spread, political polarization, resolving deadlock, in robotics, collision avoidance, all kinds of stuff. Okay, but one limitation about this model, though, is that it assumes that you have access to the opinions of the agents, which you usually don't. Like, I don't know what you're thinking, right? Maybe I have a clue. So we did our AI for science approach to learn from things that we can observe, the physical behavior of agents. So here in the marketplace, we can see what they're doing to try to learn a representation of the opinions. And we do this in a graph neural network. And then once we arrive at this latent space, we've learned a mapping from the observation space to this latent space, we do all of our dynamics using the nonlinear opinion dynamics model. And then we decode back to the physical space, and we can do trajectory prediction this way. Okay, so it turns out that this works really well for a variety of systems, mechanical systems, biological systems. We can do predict pedestrian behavior even with this. And the representations that we learn, because those representations are structured with the nonlinear opinion dynamics model, those representations are also interpretable. I don't have a slide for that, unfortunately, but let's continue. So if we go back to this slide I showed you the slide before, and I talked about everything on this slide actually except for this. So I don't know who caught that. But that aggregation function, that linear aggregation function that we saw that has been used for behavior, also is used, a version of it is also used for aggregation in graph neural networks. So we see this dynamics model used on our engineering application side, and now also on our neural network application side. And so we end up actually with the same issue that we saw on our when we try to model the behavior of agents. So we saw when we try to model the behavior of agents with this linear consensus model, everybody goes to the same space, right? And so if we think about every single node in this graph neural network as being an agent, and it's collecting information from its neighbors, but we're using this linear aggregation function, then you see like at early in the network, the representations that we learn are separable to some extent. But as we get deeper and deeper into the network, it's like applying this consensus again and again and again and again, and we get closer all to the same value. And so this is actually, this phenomenon is called oversmoothing. Yes.
Sorry.
No, everything, please.
Is she here a layer body?
Okay, so T here. Yeah. Yeah, so yes. Yeah, so when we think about the dynamics case, when we're thinking about collective behavior, the T would be over time, and here now we can understand T as the layer in the graph neural network. Yeah, I didn't say that. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Okay. But if we use the nonlinear opinion dynamics model to give us an aggregation, an approach for aggregation, we actually can design our model to resolve this issue. And so these images that I showed before, where we can choose our value of U, and we can choose our value of B, our environmental bias, in order to ensure that we are always allowing diverse representations. Okay, so we can improve node classification with that approach. And also, like maybe this occurred to you already, but we can use graph neural networks also to do trajectory prediction, right? But if we do trajectory prediction, just like you were saying, with this graph neural network, we end up in that same situation where we have convergence of all of these agents. And so that's actually illustrated here. If we use a conventional graph neural network that has a sort of a consensus type aggregation function, then while all of your agents start from these zeros, circles, and they start with differing positions, over time, the representations become increasingly similar and they start going all the same place. But if instead we replace that aggregation function with our nonlinear opinion dynamics model, we actually have better representation of the true character of the trajectories of the agents. Okay, so that's our shared dynamics, thinking about shared dynamics. And this was our dynamics that we discussed. This was AI for science, science for AI, right? This reciprocity here. And in this final part, I want to talk about shared objectives. Okay. And so this part is actually new to us. Oh, Antoine's here. I've been harassing Antoine about this. I'm so glad you're here. I think Denzel is here too. Yeah. Okay. I see you guys. And shared objectives. We've been thinking about Marl. Okay. So Marl is hard. And here is a visualization. If we just use a vanilla, yes. Oh yeah, multi-agent reinforcement learning, sorry. And so this is like, kind of like we have a bunch of agents and we're trying to learn what actions they need to take in order to achieve some goal. Oh, thank you for that. And so if we just use like, vanilla neural networks in order to do this task. So you already saw the GIF. It won't replay. I've tried several times. I'm really sorry about that. But these agents are purple ones. They'll try to cover these dots. This is a landmark coverage problem. They try to cover these dots, but they sort of get confused and then they sort of figure it out, whatever, right? So it's a little clumsy. It looks a little clumsy when they do it. But okay, so now look at this one. Oh, no. Okay, I promise you this one is better than that one. Yeah, but if we embed into this algorithm, so I told you we had a vanilla sort of neural network architecture doing this, but if we look at our problem of multi-agent reinforcement learning, right, we have these agents, but if we think about our agents themselves, like there's some symmetry in them, right? If it's the same kind of agent, then it doesn't matter how we index them. There's this permutation symmetry that we can take advantage of. Also, like when we were talking about robotics applications, if we, so this is the permutation symmetry. The indexes are changed. It's the same. And also, if we change how things are arranged in the space, but it's a rigid transformation of the space, so everything relative to its neighbors is the same, but from some global frame we've been rotated, then we also have that symmetry where now our agents should respond in a way that is proportional to the change that we saw of the space. And so if we put that, oh man, it's so bad. If we put that constraint into our neural network architectures that are doing this problem, then we get substantial improvement in the behavior of our agents. We not only do we get substantial improvement in the behavior of our agents, we also can get good results with much less data, and we can also generalize to new configurations of the space much better. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. Kevin Wang has a paper out for that. Sorry, I didn't put the site here. Yes?
Is the neural of the model, is it the policy that the agent should follow, or is it the trajectory that the agent will follow in this situation?
It's the action, right? So my agent A here has an action go straight up. But then if I rotate the environment like this, my agent's action should also rotate and go this way. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so, right. Okay, and then there's this piece here. So the multi-agent reinforcement learning problem can be framed as like a min-max optimization problem. It's a saddle point problem. And hopefully, like, I have convinced you at this point, maybe, that sharing is caring, right? Yes? Okay. And so this saddle point problem is not only seen, of course, with multi-agent reinforcement learning, right? We see it in so many problems. And so my idea that I want to pose to you is that we can use this strategy that we've developed for multi-agent reinforcement learning on other kinds of systems. And so one that we've looked at is, are we recorded? Yes. We are recorded. Yeah. Okay.
We don't hit buttons.
Okay. Thank you. So one scenario that we've looked at is thinking about sensor placement. So we have a colleague, Corey Baker at USC, and he thinks about networks. And he has this problem. He says, well, we're thinking about smart cities and we want to place sensors at strategic locations so that we get information passed around the city as best as possible. And so that's sensor placement problem, and he's doing it by buses. Right? So a bus will go to a stop where a sensor has been placed. It'll give information or take information, and then ultimately at the end of the day, all the buses go to the depot. Is that right language? I don't know. Okay, so if the network is fixed, right? If flow on the network is constant, there are very good algorithms to do this. But when we think about buses, okay, buses, they run more during rush hour maybe than they do like at midnight, and then also more regularly during the week than they do on the weekend. So the flow on this network is changing in time. And so now this sensor placement problem actually becomes quite hard. But this problem also has the same symmetries, right? If I rotate the entire thing, then all the sensor placements should also rotate. And also the indexing of all of our sensors doesn't actually matter. We can change the indexing, it doesn't matter. And so this problem actually turns out to also have min-max structure. And so our idea is we can also use the algorithm that we developed for this specific moral context to also help in this context. Yeah, and there are many problems like that. Antoine has a problem like that. Yeah, what's up? Tell me.
So in both of these ones, some of the agents, okay, you said, no, look, yeah, this is the, some of the things are interchangeable.
Yeah.
And I want to say, like, having worked on multi-agent problems for so long, that is one of the worst part of, like, or well, that was the creativity of designing algorithms that could deal with the interchangeability of agents, and a lot of time and papers are spent developing just one algorithm for one problem that could do it, that didn't use IDs because things were interchangeable.
For sure.
So being able to do it automatically would be actually pretty amazing. But some of them are interchangeable and some are not.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where you were showing the other example. This art, with the buses.
Yeah.
The sensors are in particular physical spaces, so they're not interchangeable, or they are interchangeable? Or is it just the buses that are basically don't matter which bus speed to which place?
Yeah. So the sensors, the indexes of the sensors are interchangeable to some degree. We may end up with a situation where sensors that are on this particular red route are interchangeable, whereas they're not, like, depending on the kinds of sensors we're using, right? Maybe we use a specific type of sensor here and a different one here on the green route. And so maybe these are interchangeable with each other and those are interchangeable with each other, but they're not with across paths. And we actually think about that situation also here, where we have pink agents and purple agents, and the purple ones are the same kind of agent. So we can have this permutation symmetry built on them. So we can build a graph between them and have the permutation symmetry built into our architecture. And the purple agents are also identical agents, but they're not the same as the pink ones. So we can change the IDs of these guys.
And so that's part of your problem setup.
Yeah, is that we know who are interchangeable and who aren't. Yeah. And we build it based on that knowledge. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much for that, because actually this last slide, this is my last slide, yes, 11:59, is my slide to prompt you for your problems. Well, not any kind of problem, but your problems that have this min-max structure, this saddle point structure, and with the hope that maybe we can use our algorithms on your problems. So that's actually the close. We're super excited to collaborate. So yeah, if you're intrigued by this talk, please talk to us. And I'll close with sharing is caring. If we can share insights across domains, I think that leads to better science. And that's it. Thank you.
In this big picture AI for science, for AI slide you introduced, is there a space for these kinds of these kinds of hybrid models or physics-guided architecture design implemented by physical systems? So, I mean, there's a difference between simulating a differentiable system on the computer, and a physical system that obeys those equations of motion by law, like by natural law. So is there a space for that? When you list these things, which I've seen often, does one think about that distinction, or is it somehow within one of these boxes?
I'm not totally sure that I understand the question, but I'm going to give it a try and tell me.
Give it a try.
Okay, yeah. So what I think I understand is the question is, well, if you are dealing with a system in simulation, of course it's going to be perfect. And if you're dealing with a system in real life, then it may have guiding principles, but there may be other effects you can't capture, so it's not perfect. Is this kind of the idea or no?
Sorry, I've had a hard time hearing you from...
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Could you repeat that again?
Is the distinction that you're making that in simulation, things can be very precise and exact, whereas in the real world they can't? Is that the distinction you're making?
Sort of, yes. And then, one step further, saying that, well, your sensors generally are subject to this, whatever physical inaccuracies that you may expect. So why not optimize those systems which are already, connect them in ways so that they already take into account, like a black box, those kinds of imperfections.
So like using the physics of the sensor itself
Yes.
to design a way to interpret sensor.
Yes.
I mean, that sounds perfect. What do you mean? Wait, I'm sorry. What do you say? That sounds fantastic. What do you mean? Like using this for actual, that's what you're saying. For using this hybrid model to like correct sensor noise, basically.
Right. So,
that sounds cool.
Is that a new box, or is this
I think that's
considered in one of those boxes?
I think that could fit here.
Yeah.
I think that could also fit here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know what to call that, but that's, I think, in spirit, it's very different because there's these ideas of how do you model a physical system. Oftentimes, you have only limited modeling capabilities, right?
Right, yeah.
So why not do the optimization right on the physical system that has the sensors on them and optimize there?
Yes.
That is definitely a very different way of thinking about that problem.
Yeah, I think that is like a really different configuration than we've explored before. But the idea of can we use these kinds of algorithms to improve our sensing quality by using physics of the sensing that we know, I think that kind of falls in here.
Yeah.
I think, there are like many ways to do things. So I think, one way could be if you know the physics and you want to use your physics model and just capture deviation from that model with the neural network, you could do it like that. But you can also like constrain your neural network to give you representations that are consistent with the physics that you know. And these networks, they'll also learn deviation, right? So they have some kind of structure that's embedded there. They don't have to learn that structure. And then on top of that, they can learn other stuff. So I think that fits in this hierarchy as well. But yeah, definitely a different kind of problem. Thank you.
Glad we agree on that.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your talk. I had a question. It's probably out of scope though, but I want to ask anyways, just in case.
Yeah.
So with how robust your color rotation integration made your neural network,
Yeah.
how much like more computational demand and time was needed to, make that integration?
Okay. So, right? Yeah. Most of the additional time was like graduate student time. There is a little bit of extra time for computation as well. But it turns out that, so I've never made a graduate student time joke ever in my life, right? Sorry. Yeah, so here. So, but the time, it is linear in the size of the group. So this processing will be pretty much the same as if you had a standard architecture. But then you have all of these shifts that are happening, and those actually give you extra time. But it's not like an explosion, It's pretty modest. And here we're like using like 4. We're discretizing the rotation group to be cardinality 4. So it's really We haven't found it to be a really significant bottleneck in processing. Thank you.
So since you're exploiting rules, shouldn't it make the training much more data efficient?
Yes.
So you should be saving time.
Yes. Okay. So yes. So there's one kind of time, which is like how much time from the input to the output. And this is where we have extra time. But if we're talking about how much time to process or how much time, how many examples that we need, then we do save on the number of examples for sure. Yes, your intuition's right.
I have one question. So when we're thinking about symmetries and equivariance and invariance and so on, I would imagine there are cases where it's like there are symmetries, but they're not perfect, right? So
Yeah,
that maybe like 95% of the way there is symmetry. So how should we handle those cases? Like, should we treat it as though the symmetry is perfect and kind of do our best, and then maybe like learn something to correct for the imperfections, or is there a way to build that into the systems?
Yeah, folks are thinking about that. That's a tricky question. I really like that question, and I wish I had like a really, really good answer. There are a lot of works that attempt to deal with this situation where they try to like maybe learn to what extent the asymmetry is represented in the data set, so like they don't actually force the symmetry to have group structure, for example. They're like, okay, yeah, maybe we don't see the entire space of that symmetry. And you might think about that as being relevant, like if you're thinking about, again, the MNIST digits. Like, for example, a 6 is probably not going to rotate all the way to the 9 position, for example. So it's like a partial, you observe part of that symmetry in a data set. And so folks do think about that. I think we think about it, but we haven't made any real advancements in that. I think one thing that we have shown, also with this color equivariance thing, is that, so this is sort of like that. This actually enforces global color equivariance, right? Because we shift the input image, the entire input image, but we actually get pretty good robustness for local color changes as well. And so I think one of the benefits of embedding this structure is that you don't have to learn the structure, and you can instead maybe learn deviation a little bit from that structure. But certainly there's I think it's an important question to continue to look at, is like, how do we deal with symmetries in the data set? How can we build in a structure into our neural network to deal with symmetries that are partial? Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that
Wonderful
question.
All right, we are over time, so let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.